and they can, and again, they can be. They can be. This is the way we plant churches. Now, a lot of the stuff in REAP, I say, is biased towards this, but it's not only for this. We only work in poor areas. So we think about poverty, but again, a lot of the REAP course doesn't necessarily need that. What we do emphasize in the smaller churches, the elements of community, the way they reach out, the way people live together, and then we put this last one, they're active in evangelizing through their social networks, which sounds obvious and sort of vague and like, yeah, well, who doesn't? Right, I've never met anybody who says, no, I don't believe in evangelizing through social networks. But it's just there as a place marker to talk about sort of how we do evangelism. And that then led us on to this beauty. Now, put your hand up if you've ever seen this. So this is something that, this is the kind of curriculum of the REAP course. And this is, I think, a screen grab off the Antioch website. Again, it doesn't work just for Antioch. It doesn't work for big churches, but it should be able to work for most other kinds of churches. And it's got all these beautiful clickable little things. We designed it during COVID, so it was made to look like a virus. Well, that's not necessarily a link, but those two things did happen at the same time. And those, you can go, feel free now, you can just go onto the Antioch Network website and just pull that up, and it's clickable. There are resources built into every single one of those steps, and we hope that by the end of this there will be some more resources, because you will have put in links and will have worked through stuff and so on. So the REAP course is going to take you in the next stages through all of these three things. Identify leaders. And that might be you, that might be people you know. Train leaders. Now, train leaders, we often reinterpret it as envisioning. How do you find and grow vision? Third is choose a general area. It doesn't have to be specific. And then we get onto this next, as we move into the yellow, we move into the team phases where we're trying to grow a team. How do you recruit them? How do you mobilize them for mission? How do you establish prayer and worship patterns? And how do you find somewhere to meet? And then we go green, and that's when your church has been planted, launching public worship. And often we kind of skim over this a little bit in REAP, because there's so much there about how to lead a church. It's actually the stuff in the orange and yellow where there isn't as much. So the green is a vast thing, but we skip over it really quickly. So that's our kind of curriculum for church planting. And our hope is that you can use this as sort of a map to understand where you are. If you see holes appearing in your church, maybe, for example, you sense that there are people who are coming in, but you don't really have a core of people who are committed, then this is a map. You can look at that and say, okay, well, what do I need to do to strengthen the team? So I'm going to take a pause there. Are there any questions on sort of the inspiration of the REAP course around leader-led church planting, or about this kind of curriculum we use of these sort of 3 phases and sort of 12 steps? Have you got any questions?
Yeah. Oh, sorry. Go on.
Yeah, go ahead.
I know I just had one question. So when I said church of three, I was being a bit cheeky. We're a team of three, actually. But on here, after 4, recruit a team as well. So obviously we need to grow. But you know how you've got number 5, identify evangelism networks. Can you just clarify? And I'm sure you're coming on to that, but can you clarify just very quickly what you mean by the networks?
Yeah, sneak preview. So yeah, so if identify evangelism networks says that so sometimes, particularly if you do this locally, you it's fairly obvious. It's determined by your geography. It's where you are, and what you'll find as you step into the sort of doing your outreach and doing your evangelism, nevertheless, you'll connect with certain families, and those families will become, if you like, your evangelism networks. Whereas if you do it, say, in the city centre, those might be sort of scattered ethnic groups, different kinds of people. And the point is that every church will tend to work well for a certain group of people, and it doesn't work for others. So it's about finding the people that you can reach and help, finding the people that your team is equipped to reach out to call into discipleship and call into community. If that makes sense.
Yeah, totally does. Like the people of peace on your estate, ones that
so
kind of that sort of thing.
That sort of thing. And like I say, for an estate, that's super geographical, but say for ESA in Rusholme, geography is not our issue. I mean, like ethnicity, language, stuff like this. People with like high levels of addiction or mental health things. I mean, they're all kind of separate constituencies. Yeah. So we call it, the thing is, we call it, it's the overlap between your call and your opportunity. That's our shorthand for what's going to happen there. But obviously, we'll go into it in more detail. Anyone else? Or are you happy to continue?
Hi, John. Yeah, so this template, this map, it doesn't necessarily go in the exact order either, does it?
Yeah, that's right. Go on. So, yeah.
Explain. Sometimes it doesn't go that way. Sometimes you jump from 9 to, I don't know, 3. I'm just making that up, but I'll let you speak. So.
Well, it's a very good question. I think it would be great as we go through to pull in a bunch of stories actually and look at how things have gone. I think in Antioch leadership, and again, this isn't just an Antioch thing. I mean, this is meant to be used more widely. I think we go back and forth about how seriously you should take the sequences, because sometimes we think, well, we just put them down and wherever they fall, you know, that's fine. Other times we think, we look at, say, people who planted churches without teams, and they're very vulnerable. You know, they go on holiday or they get ill and the whole thing just crashes. So you're definitely right. They don't just happen in sequence. But I think it would be good for you as a group to work through, and I think it's great to hear, Catherine. You know, and obviously I know Issa as well, leading in Rusholme, to think about how important those sequences are. Stories of where they've been really important and stories where we've actually jumped around. So yes, it's a question, a good question.
Hi, I'm sorry, I'm joined really late, so I don't know what I've missed or where I'm coming in, but are you kind of taking questions about the journey around the cycle?
Yeah.
So I don't know what's already been asked, but I mean, you mentioned it just now about the identifying leaders and then training leaders as the kind of first stages. So I'm quite interested in those stages, but if you've already talked about it, that's fine. And I just was also interested in if you've got any kind of reflections on this model rather than the Fresh Expressions journey, and what the kind of if there was any kind of reflections on the differences or why you're finding this model's working particularly well for you guys. And I guess the question, just going back to the question around team, I think that's because I guess, yeah, I feel like it's a bit of a catch-22 sometimes. Like if sometimes it can be difficult to recruit team until you've kind of got something to recruit them to, maybe. But
yeah, sorry.
Yeah. So, but I don't want to. But if that's all going off on a rabbit trail, that's fine. But those are that's what I'm coming in with.
So I'm going to deal with those really quickly, because what we're doing is we're obviously very successfully giving you a taste for what's going to come. So I don't want to like overdo the content here. The thing about a leader is, as you're going to see, we line leadership up at this stage in the orange stage. We actually talk about what a church is and what it means to be a governed space of a church. So in our idea here is that the pattern of leadership is a sort of governance decision-making thing that generates vision, but it also generates community. It generates community and purpose, and that community is the church, and the church is a home for people. Now, the training is often about just honing that vision and looking at the gap in skills. Fresh Expressions is a technical term for those of you who don't know it, but I think that this overlaps with what you might call the Fresh Expressions movement, but it's fairly clear about sort of church's boundary community. Church is something that, as a home for people, asks for quite a deep level of loyalty from them. We distinguish between church planting and ministry and outreach. But you'll see that over the next session, we'll start talking about getting into. Okay, I'm going to go on. There'll be a little bit of space for questions, and then I will join Mr. Turner. So, is there an echo that's just appeared here? Have you got an echo?
Is it hi? Is it John Aquado? Are you trying to ask a question, John?
Yes, thank you so much. And could you please share the screen again from number 1 and up to 11? That's what I wanted to ask about, maybe identifying the leaders. Does this mean when we are dealing with the disciples, is it only about leaders, or you can just raise leaders or must you go for this? They should be leaders, or you can just go to a believer, a disciple.
John, I'm struggling to hear you. Might be worth putting a question in the chat.
Oh, yeah. Can you hear me there? My question is,
John, if you could type the question in the chat, that would be great. I think we're not going to manage to be able to hear you down that line. It's probably the fault of the British internet, not the Kenyan. Apologies.
I mean, just as a general thing, I mean, obviously, I'm just laying out what the course is going to cover. We are going to be going into this in depth. And if you do want to sneak peek it, take a sort of sneak preview, you can just get a lot of this content off the site. In fact, I'm not sure you can get this bit because it's step 0. This is about the REAP course, not about that church planning lead. But you can step forward, and actually a lot of the answers to these questions you can just get by clicking on the loop.
Yeah. If it helps as well, I'm happy perhaps after John, you've finished your section here, at some stage I could give people a bit of a tour of how we've organized the website so people can see it kind of how everything's mapped against different points of the loop, if that's useful to people.
That'd be great. So yeah, and okay, so I've got John's question in the chat then. Must these people be leaders, or can they just be disciples of Jesus Christ? I mean, so at the beginning of the REAP course, it is almost a sort of a view into the heart of like a church plant leader. As it goes on, so as it goes into the yellow bit there, that's when teams gather around people, and there the whole thing of being a disciple and supporting churches as they're planted becomes sort of much more relevant. I think at one point we actually invited potential team members in as we kind of kicked off the yellow. So yellow is from about a third of the way through the course. It's, yeah, absolutely. It'll be totally on point for everyone. At the beginning, it'll be more those leaders. Does that answer your question, John? Hope it does. Look, I'm going to go on. So this is a quote. Oh no, that's not a quote. So Jesus said, you know, I have chosen you so that you will go and bear fruit that will last. And that the whole process of church planting is not mechanistic. We plant churches to make disciples under the authority of Christ in his presence. And when Christ decides that a church will be planted and it will grow and flourish, then it will. That if, you know, that the Lord opens a door, it stays open. If he shuts it, it shuts. And so we're always keen in the REAP course to keep the equip and the animate together. Often one thing we say is actually learning the skills of church planting is a form of worship. It's a form of, it's a challenge to learn. And that in itself is worship. But you know, I know Dan's doing the heart of the leader thing. Our goal as we plant churches must always be to know Christ better. Because if it is, that will find its way through into the church. And if our goal is to do something, then that too will come into the culture of the church. And we don't want our churches to be about doing things. We want them to be about knowing Christ. So again, I hope that as we go through the course, we'll be examining and growing hearts, getting ready for what the Lord is calling us to do in leadership. Excuse me. I'm still struggling. Okay. So we've put in some things here that ways that the REAP course might and might not help you. It does give a bigger picture. It often planting churches is so intimidating. You're like, oh God, what am I going to do? You know, where am I going to start? How would I do that? Or it just seems confusing. Now, this curriculum, the way that we do REAP, it's designed to be super practical, and it does give us a bigger picture. We hope it'll break things down a little bit, help you think. We hope it'll be really practical. Equally, there are things that the REAP course doesn't necessarily help with. It's not, as somebody has says, it's not a rigid thing. It doesn't tell you how to be empathetic, or we might tell you that you should be emotionally mature, but we don't tell you necessarily how to do that. That there are a bunch of things that we miss out. It can seem a little bit rigid. So we don't want to overclaim for it. And we really hope that the REAP course will be a space where we can take those little steps of church planting, think about them, pray through them, talk about them together, and step up. But of course, it's not a magic bullet. There's no such thing. I think Dan's going to go on to do this. Are you going to do this, Dan? This bit?
Yep.
Well, I'm going to run over it really quickly. We love you to be committed. We love you to be reading. We love to be hanging out with your group. We love you to be learning with people. That's why we're all doing on a course, and you can't just strip it off the website. Please don't just drop out without warning somebody. But we're also really, really happy for, we love it when people go deeper, or you want to do some one-to-one, get some coaching, ask a question. Obviously, Dan's an experienced church planter. He's on his, are you on your second or third or fourth? How many is it, Dan? Second. That's second. Very experienced in our world. So there you go. That is, I'm going to stop sharing. There you go. That's an overview of the course. Any more questions? It'd be great to hear them. It's an overview of what we hope you'll be learning, how you'll be learning it. Catherine, can you just tell us what were some of the things you picked up through the first time you did it?
Wow, John. So some of the things, oh, you know, I've got that memory, don't you? That's why I'm doing it again. Some of the things about choosing team and how important it is to choose the right team, I would suggest. Things, oh, you're going to put me on the spot now. I hate being put on the spot. Could just go blank. Right, yes, I'm going blank. So I'm more like a doer, so like evangelism, how important evangelism is and how important prayer is. Then Rivens in planting churches and their fundamentals. I'm just having a look at this. Having a look at this little chart I've got in front of me. Yeah, recruiting team, definitely, and shaping your team and finding venue. Yeah, just, well, I don't know what to say. Sorry.
No, that's great. The thing is, it's at every point, the idea is none of us are perfect, and we're always. I often find I classify myself as an oppositional learner at one point. So oppositional learners work out what the teacher is trying to teach you and then try and learn the exact opposite just to see if it works. And say oppositional learners are very welcome This is a safe space for you, oppositional learners. But part of it is just bringing those ideas of what do we do at this stage? What do we do as we try and generate vision? What does vision mean? And even if you come to a different conclusion from the one that we come through, at least you kind of put that out there. You look at it in the light of scripture, and you'll have thought about it. And we hope that will be helpful for you. Are there any other? Yeah, go ahead.
Sorry, I've got loads. I've got loads of questions, but I'm just going to try and keep it focused. So, is it just so, Catherine, have you planted since doing the course?
Yes. So me and my husband have planted in Piccadilly Gardens, and so we planted from November. So
I don't know if this again, if I missed out on this, but I would really love to hear, even if it's just like a summary of like what you've done, and also maybe from Dan. I'd be really interested to hear just, yeah, maybe some little stories of how the work's gone, sort of, or how the process has worked for people.
Yeah, we can perhaps come to that a little bit later in the evening, perhaps when John's finished his bit and we run through a couple of other things. Does that sound all right?
Safer space after I've gone,
nothing bad about John. No, no, joking. No, he's good. He's great.
We did some brief introductions just before you joined us, Jennifer. That's not a passive aggressive dig in any way.
So, any other questions?
You've obviously silenced us all with your brilliance, John.
Yeah, I was sitting in a meeting on Saturday, and somebody was talking about how often sometimes I don't communicate particularly well. So, well, look, I hope it will all become clear if it's not clear. We would love to hear a lot of your stories. We don't believe that this is a kind of top-down exercise in wisdom. It's more of a space for thinking about things, praying through things, and yeah, we'd love to hear some of your stories. So I am going to check out now because I'm going to go back to my long-lost sister, sitting around a bonfire, and but I'll see you again further down the course, God willing.
Thanks, John. Appreciate it.
Thanks, John.
Right.
Cheers.
Now, John referenced the website a couple of times there. Pete's very kindly gonna show us around it, just give us a quick tour, so you know how to navigate it a little bit and find some useful stuff.
Thanks a lot, Dan. And just before I do, I think it's possible, I don't know for sure, but I think it's possible that John put Kath slightly on the spot by saying, what did you get out of the course? I don't want to speak out of turn, but I know we did quite a lot of stuff around team, which you guys ended up outworking in quite a gritty way. And I was going into any personal stories particularly, but there was stuff about managing conflicts within a team and who do you invite into your kind of launch team or core team. The terminologies will vary slightly from network and place and so on. But I remember after that, Kath and her husband Graham did a great job dealing with somebody who was sort of in the process of joining their team, but was quite belligerent. And I remember Graham and Kath saying, we just invited him to serve. We just kept inviting him in to serve. And in the end, he moved on. And so I think that was one of those really brilliant stories where it was, I saw that a little bit of that process where I actually knew the guy and I had conversations with Kath and Graham about him, and just giving them a bit of a heads up. And then as it happened, they dealt with it better than anyone else that I'd known. So hopefully that would be like an example of where at some stage during the loop, which we're going to just come back to now, there might be a particular part of it, which is super relevant to some of you. So maybe that's a bit of a case in point. So let me just show you our website. It's something that's an ongoing project for us. But can you guys see this okay? Okay, so across this big black banner, we've got all this stuff, safeguarding, a list of our churches and so on. Some of these are in pre-launch stage and some of them have already launched. Most of them have. If we go to training, that's the section you're looking for. And here we go, the REAP Church Planting course. That's just our proposed dates, which you already have. And this is the loop. So as we did our introductions earlier, each one of you was saying something that would kind of place you maybe at some point during this loop. So we had, correct me if I'm wrong, Sarah, you were talking about a team of 3. Ben, you were talking about a ascending church. Christina, you were talking about an Eden team. So the elements of this that for different people will be particularly, might be where you'd say you're most at now. But let's just take an example of recruit a team. Well, if that happens to be perhaps the next kind of logical step in a journey of trying to plant a church, if you've managed to get a couple of leaders together and you've got a heart for a particular community, just to take that as an example, you can click on that particular thing and then it brings up a page which has got some of the REAP content here down the main spine on recruiting a team, and then maybe a fuller document there, like a PDF that you can just click on and it will open it up. Sorry, let me just go back. I'm going to have to just chop around a bit here. And then what we have outside of the actual Antioch content, we've got some of the best stuff that matches that theme. So should I bring anyone onto my team? That's super relevant to Kath and Graham's story that I just referenced briefly. Great piece from Ed Stetzer on whether you should call it a launch team or a core team, how to recruit one, and gathering people pre-launch. So they're just some external resources, and they're basically the best resources we happen to know of. But of course, you guys are all part of, well, I'll come back to that in a second, but basically this is another version of it that you can just click on. So if you've had a read around and you fancy clicking to kind of the next step in the loop, you can just go to the next one, which happens to be identifying evangelism networks, something that John's referenced, and it'll be the same format, basically a piece from one of our directors, which is down the middle, and maybe a little bit of a second piece, and then some more external resources. This one is from the Joshua Center, the stuff around Alpha, a classic book around evangelism from a guy called Michael Green, who's some of you may well have heard of. So that's basically how it works. And John was saying how there's all sorts of stuff around actual church leadership, which we kind of skip over, or if at all cover, because that's kind of at the very end of the loop. But we recognize that for people who are interested in planning churches or are just getting started or are fairly early on, there's so many other stages to cover that we want to try and devote quite a lot of time to working through prayerfully what these mean. And just going back to the thing that was discussed earlier about it not being a rigid sequence, if I could just give a couple of examples. Isa's just taken over leading a church that got started, and then a leader moved on, and then a couple sort of took it on for a while, and then they've had other commitments. I believe one of them's a GP, is that right, Isa? Fiona. So Isa's kind of not started at step one of the loop. He's come in with a church plant that's already up and running. Then if we look at the Upper Room Church in Cheetham Hill, they had a team before they had a leader. They had identified where they wanted to plant. They'd actually basically started meeting, but they were a kind of a joint team, but they didn't really have the clear leader at first. And so I think what John was trying to say was that we're not suggesting that this everybody has the same start point. And obviously Jennifer, you mentioned fresh expressions. There are obviously other ways of starting a ministry or starting a church. And we're not trying to oversell this. It's like the only way to do stuff. That would be ridiculous and it would be arrogant. And we're not trying to. But these are things that have come out of experience from our directors and from us as a network, where generally speaking, all of these bases have to be prayerfully thought through at some stage, even if they don't all happen in that exact order. And another thing to mention is that we're finding recently that for some leaders, it's easier to recruit somebody to a particular activity before you form a launch team. So some of the stuff about identifying evangelism kind of networks or methods in a particular community, you might, one network that we know of, for example, the first thing they do before they plant a church is to start an alpha course, and they just see what God does through that. And so in a sense, that would be picking up on like a third of the way through the loop. But at the same time, from that, then starting to draw in team. And if you try and do something like that without bringing team in, as John was saying earlier, you end up crashing and burning most of the time. That's our experience anyway. And so without that, again, if a leader is sick, if a leader gets into trouble with something or another, is away, is on holiday, you don't have enough to kind of keep going often. So I hope that's been a little bit helpful to flesh out some of what's been saying. I'll stop talking now unless anyone wants to ask me anything else. And I'll hand back to John. John, to Dan.
Really helpful, Pete. Anyone want to jump in with any follow-up question or anything?
Yeah.
Go for it.
So we have a big sending church. I've had this before. So like ages ago, I started a ministry with women in prostitution, and there was just two of us that started it. And some of the churches, the big churches that supported us, we must admit, they hung back a bit to see if it would work. And I know that sounds cynical, but we got lots of bakers and lots of people to pray, and hardly anyone wanted to come in the brothels, but the Lord was in it, and so he grew it. And that was from starting. So kind of, I'm in the same situation now. Like, we have a big sending church and we've got an ordinand on the core team, but raising other people, like, because I saw, as you flicked up the team thing, it said 6 to 10, and I was like, yeah, I know we need more team. But because we're in the urban priority area that is not near the sending church, if that makes sense, which is city centre. Yeah, have you ever planted in a place where you're a bit, maybe say a couple of miles from your sending church? And how did you like encourage people who maybe live in, I don't know, more affluent areas to come and support or come and join what you feel the Lord's doing?
Yeah, very good questions. Yeah, and I think you've highlighted a number of key challenges, right, with the kind of planting that we're talking about. So probably our situation here is pretty similar to what you're talking about. So we don't have a sending church. So we planted, my wife Sarah and I, we've got 3 young boys. I was doing something different elsewhere in the diocese before joining Antioch a year ago. And then, yeah, we've come here without the support of a local kind of supporting church. And it is hard. It's very hard. It's one of the, on one hand, it's one of the advantages of something like Antioch, right? Having the support of the wider network, we're aiming to be able to, I suppose, give this kind of thing a go where it wouldn't be so possible if we were just kind of lone rangers, right? It would pretty quickly crash and burn. But because we can do it as part of Antioch, it gives us something of the kind of support that a sending church would give. In terms of, but yeah, it's a big challenge, definitely. I was just talking with Ben earlier today. So Ben is the other half of John. And not in that way. Ben and John are the two directors of Antioch, and we were talking about the challenge of bringing leaders into a community from outside, and the balance of, on the one hand, you want a critical mass and some resource to get stuff going, to kind of turn the wheel, as it were. On the other hand, you can sort of swamp a local culture with a culture that's different from, you know, you mentioned like people from more affluent areas. That's a classic, right? You know, you just transport a more kind of middle class type church, say, into an estate context, and aren't effective in reaching the people that you actually want to reach. So I think it's, we found it particularly hard around team here. People who have been part of our team for one reason or other, there's just been challenges. It's just difficult. Like, without wanting to bore you with my life story, I think it's a hard call often. To come to an estate, to move, to uproot your life is a hard call. We're just down the road from the Message Trust in Wythenshawe. Who mentioned Eden earlier? Was it? Yeah, Christina, great. So Eden are part of the Message Trust, awesome kind of pseudo church planting network, I guess you call Eden. They often have a lot of younger people doing it with the kind of networks that the Message Trust have, and their kind of the oomph of a big organization behind it like that. Our experience is it is difficult to, say, appeal to like a family who've got kids in school and jobs and all that kind of stuff. Once people kind of get to a certain stage of life, maybe John in Kenya can tell us what it's like in Kenya, but I think in the UK, it's a challenge. It's a high call to offer people, and so I don't have a nice little solution for you other than just sympathizing that it's hard. Does anyone have anything that they kind of want to speak into that? Pete, you're putting up your hand or scratching your nose.
Bit of both, actually. No, so firstly, I would love us to loop back to what John was saying about wonder teachings. I'd love to hear a bit more from him. But in terms of the UK context, my wife and I, we went to a baptism service on Saturday, and it wasn't connected to Antioch. It was actually some friends of ours in a different network called Christ Church Manchester. Some family friends of ours, they're part of that, and they had this incredible array of 7 people being baptized, and one of them was like a guy who traveled around the world, and he'd lived in San Francisco, and he'd had all these experiences with work and stuff, and in some ways it was quite a kind of high-end, quite a sort of not affluent necessarily at all, but quite a kind of broad story. But the first woman who came and told her testimony was like on an estate in Stockport, and she was tattooed, and she was flipping brilliant. And she did this thing about, I asked God for a sign, and then I got lost, and it didn't seem a very good sign. And she just had everyone laughing. It was brilliant. And I think what happens, the biggest divide I see in the church in Britain is not race, it's not ethnicity, it's class. It's actually really hard, and some people refuse to sacrifice their kind of lifestyle, if you will. And at the same time, some people aren't called to that kind of ministry either. So what's really difficult is then having a conversation without alienating people who have a good reason to stay where they are, but also wanting to challenge people who have a good reason to leave the comfort of where they are and to go somewhere else. And that's, you know, obviously that's exactly what happens with the incarnation, with Jesus getting off his throne and coming to be one of us. So there's good biblical case study for that. And that's, but it's really hard to have that conversation without just insulting everyone who lives in a nice area, quotes, or telling everybody that they've got it wrong where they are, or just allowing people to kind of have almost an excuse. It's not okay. It's really tricky, but there is something that John came up with a few years ago. And we use it to measure how many people are turning up in our churches. And he calls it old, new, borrowed, and blue. So this is a bit of a reference to British marriage traditions. But old means existing Christians, obviously. New means people have come to faith fairly recently. Borrowed means people who are part of another church, but they're supportive and they might come and help. They might come and attend once a month or something. And then blue means people who might be on a kind of staff team. So if you think about that, if you've got people you want to bring into your area in terms of a ministry or a church, perhaps in the urban priority area, the private area, whatever, it's not a bad thing to have people will come once a month to get stuck in with something. And it's not necessarily, we shouldn't have to make people just leave everything they do to get a taste of what's going on. And I think sometimes that's a really healthy thing. So there's quite a few people where Isa is in Rusholme over the years at different stages who've been sort of borrowed, and they've been part of other churches, but they've still been able to come and help out in the bookshop or with the evangelism. I'm sure Isa, you have more up-to-date stories on that, but I do think that's a healthy thing to have people, and that you know they're borrowed and they know they're borrowed, but at the same time it does give them a chance, some exposure to what God's doing in a particular area. And it might be that the time comes for some of those borrowed people to become your part of your core team. And either way, I've come to see that as a win, as long as people are quite clear about what the expectations are. So anyway, I hope that's useful.
It's really helpful, Pete. It is something that we've been trying to do a little bit here. So last Sunday we had a guy come from a big church up the road, and he led some sung worship for us. So in our kitchen. This is where, here you go. This is our kitchen, and this is where we have church at the moment. Yeah, we had like keys and a drum and a guitar in here, and it was quite cool. But he was a kind of guest and a local supporter. And Pete mentioned Alpha earlier. We're looking at starting an Alpha course later in the term, and potentially bringing in some local Christians who go to travel to a bigger church up the road, but are really kind of intrigued by what we're doing and the local kind of mission emphasis that we have. And you could see that they would like to have sort of dip their toe in, do you know what I mean? But they're looking for a way that they can. So I think I've kind of, there's a journey I've gone on a little bit the last few months from quite an idealistic sort of like wanting people who are completely sold out, like willing to just, you know, sell everything instantly, and live on the streets on the estate if necessary, to realizing some people just need something a bit more tangible to get their teeth into. And yeah, Pete described it well, that kind of dynamic.
Can I just clarify?
Yeah.
So at the moment, have you got a leadership team, or were you saying that kind of you did have one, but it's kind of there's been lots of transition? At the moment that you've.
We do have a leadership team, and there has been lots of transition.
Okay. And so, so
Yeah.
the people that you did recruit or that you have got, like, where have they come from?
Yeah, kind of exist. We've been around Greater Manchester, the Northwest, for a little while, so we had some existing networks of people that we knew and stuff, and so it was from there. That was kind of what we lent on heavily, without that kind of advantage of being part of a church and just being able to stand up the front one morning and go, hey, we're going to go plant a church down the road, want to come with us? We weren't able to do that. So yeah, thankfully the Lord had given us some kind of connections around that have worked out in that regard. I'm quite conscious of time. I do, when we the next thing I'd love us to quickly touch on would be what John is. So John is saying, I oversee 2 churches here in Kenya, and I also run pastors and leaders forums. Amazing here in Kenya. How can I incorporate them in the, how can you incorporate this wonderful teaching into that? That's a good question. As Pete said, the website has lots of resources that you're very welcome to borrow, and yeah, I mean, anytime you want to kind of use what you've learned elsewhere, that's fine. There's no kind of copyright as far as I know. Pete might know otherwise, but
well, lots of it's borrowed from other people in the first place. So the stuff down the middle of the website is primarily Antioch's experience, but of course there's thousands and thousands of amazing people doing different things in different parts of the world. So we've basically cribbed some of the best stuff we can find from, so Tim Keller's networks, Redeemer City to City, I think it's called, will be one, and there's Christchurch Manchester, there's loads of others. There's a Norwegian, we've got some stuff from a Norwegian network called, I think it's M4. So, you know, and one of the things we want to do with this resource is, if, say, for example, Christina, you write something like a blog post or do a video, or you come across something that you think would be relevant to one part of the loop especially, or it's just helpful to those other people on the REAP course, please send it to us, because not only would we love to share that around this group, but we'd also happily put that on the website, because we're all got different connections with different people, and so there might be something that somebody, whoever it might be, just comes across this absolute solid gold, which we want to keep developing these the site, so that there's more and more helpful content out there that's kind of relevant to at least one part of the loop.
Brill. I'm going to give us a 2-minute break. And then we'll, the last thing we'll touch on before we finish tonight is just something on what the heart of a leader is. So not just kind of thinking about the mechanics of church planting, but also what's going on inside us as we do it. So is that all right? 2-minute break. So back at let's say 8:50. That's 3 minutes. And then we'll crack on from there.
Catherine, are you staying on?
Yes.
Can you, in 2 minutes, give me a quick download?
Yes, of course. Yeah. So in what aspects, what do you want to know? What
just love to hear a summary of kind of what yeah, just a little bit of where you are, not where you are, but like just what you're doing and what your context is and what you know, how it's going.
So it's our context is planting a diverse church in Piccadilly Gardens, and we've launched from November last year. We've been going how many months now? 7, 8, no, 9 months. 9 months. We have evangelistic tactics modelled on the streets, English class. We have prayer rhythms. Before Bible study, we have Bible study on a Tuesday. Every Friday, Alexander Library. So that's foundational to everything, because that has to be the board, like seeking God, praying, but then on our service on a Saturday. So we have English class, 1:30 to 2:30, food and community. So we bring a pot of food and put it in a hot pot, and then our coffee and set out, and then we have live worship. So we have a service then.
So
all
you
in one
have,
day.
you have gone straight quite quick, because what I noticed with the model is it goes in quite quickly with a service, a kind of, it doesn't necessarily have to be a Sunday, I guess, but just a weekly kind of gathering, as well as doing the missional stuff as well.
So we have on Fridays we have evangelism 1 week, prayer another, and then we do it like that.
Yeah.
Tuesdays Bible study, and then before Bible study is the hour, like 5 to 6. We'll either pray together as a team, go over stuff that we need to go over, or if there's any like nuts and crannies that people are struggling with, or we need to talk about stuff, or we'll have evangelize before that hour as well.
Are you a lay leader?
Yes, me and my husband, yes. So we co-lead it, yes.
And are you paid at all, or are you doing this in your
Yes
time?
We are paid half time.
For like 2.5 days.
2.5 days each. So full time together.
Okay, that's good. Can I? I'd really love to hear a bit more. Can I ping you my email?
Yes, of course. Do you want to just write it in the chat, and then I'll write it down. Cool.
At some point, would you have time maybe to do a Zoom call at some point?
Yeah, no problem.
I'd love to hear a little bit more.
Yeah, and then my husband can join. And
yeah, that'd be great.
Cool.
Hello, everyone. It is 8:50. Right. Everyone okay? Alive? Yeah. Great. Yeah, I just wanted to share some stuff as we move towards the end of this introductory session. As John and Pete have mentioned as well, you know, this is a taster of what's to come. Yeah, we'd love you guys to join for the rest of the course. But there's more in-depth stuff following on from what we've touched on tonight. But I guess kind of the glue that we are convinced has to hang this stuff together, right, is that our hearts are in the right sort of place. It's all very good knowing how we should plant a church or whatever. Hopefully we might learn something about that en route. But if our hearts are in the wrong place, then it's useless. There's a verse 2 Chronicles 16:9. For the eyes of the Lord range throughout the earth to strengthen those whose hearts are fully committed to him. The eyes of the Lord range throughout the earth to strengthen those whose hearts are fully committed to him. We want to be those who are fully committed to the Lord, that we plant churches out of a conviction that our whole lives belong to Jesus, and planting churches is the way that he's called us to respond to what he's done first for us, right? So we want to ask the question, what exactly does God require of us as leaders? And that verse has at least part of the answer, right? Those who are fully committed to him is what God requires of us. First, I guess we got to hear the encouragement from that that God wants to strengthen us, that he knows each of our unique situations, wherever we're at in the church planting journey. We might have, well, we all have questions all the time. It's a inherently difficult and challenging journey, planting a church, leading a church plant. And so we must remember, right, that it's the Lord knows us and sees us and cares for us and loves us and wants to strengthen us as we go on that journey. So yeah, hopefully through REAP we won't just hear techniques and stuff. We'll hear a constant reminder that the Lord's cheering us on, that he loves the way that we've committed to him, the way that our heart belongs to him. And yeah, church planting is sacrificial, right? We've touched on that. And the Lord loves it when we love him back in that way. So yeah, just maybe perhaps take a moment to let that sink in before I go further. The Lord sees you, however you're feeling right now. He loves you. His heart is for you, to strengthen you. Yeah, thank you, Lord. There's just four things that I just want to touch on, what it might look like if our heart is fully committed to the Lord. Number one is prayer. People whose hearts are fully submitted to the Lord are going to be those who pray, right? This is basic 101 stuff, but always warrants saying. There is going to have to be discipline of prayer in our lives if we're going to plant church. Things will fall down very quickly if not. When we moved here, we felt it was, I mean, the sort of slight dysfunction and mess of our team meant that we didn't have much else to do but pray. But that was good for us, I think, you know, to remember that it's not our talent, our time, our technique. It's none of those things that is going to see the kingdom come and lives changed. It's God. So to Ben and Amy, if you ever grab them to talk about this, they'll talk passionately about their journey planting their previous church in Bolton, and how the Lord kind of humbled them and brought them to their knees, if you like, before employing any kind of outreach techniques or whatever. You might be familiar with stories of revival through church history. I love the Hebridean revival in Scotland, and that story of old age pensioners, some old ladies who knew that they couldn't do practical cutting edge ministry, but they could get together and pray. And what did they see? Well, they saw just community completely transformed, and that was the beginning of it. Prayer is just absolutely central to everything. We can think of prayer as an intimacy thing and an obedience thing. So John 15, as the Father has loved me, so I have loved you. Now remain in my love. If you keep my commands, you will remain in my love, just as I have kept my Father's commands and remain in his love. That's Jesus talking, obviously. So there's intimacy there and there's obedience. Prayer is both. Like we must have regular practice in our day of prayer, carving out time to be with God, you know, people have different things that work for them. But there has to be something, and it has to be the priority in our days. But then there's also, I guess, the posture that we come to it with. Like, prayer isn't just something that we tick off a list, right? It's not just like the first thing on our to-do list in a day. It's much more than that. Was it C.S. Lewis who talks about how prayer changes us more than it changes God? You know, we come to God as those fully submitted to him, ready for him to do whatever, recognizing that it's not about our to-do list, it's about knowing him. And whatever he wants to throw our way, whatever he wants to gift us with in terms of church, whether that's a fast growing thing or something that just takes years and years of faithful commitment to plod on, that's up to him, right? We don't bribe him by praying properly. Second, the heart of a leader, we're sorry for sin. Sorry for sin. I'm going to talk come back to this in a bit, but Isaiah 6, when Isaiah's commissioned, you see, he says, woe to me, for I am a man of unclean lips, and I live among a people of unclean lips, and my eyes have seen the Lord. There's that sense, that's his commissioning, and it comes out of a place of recognizing his inadequacy, his sinfulness before the Lord, his complete need for God to save him. And interestingly, that relates to his greatest gift as well, doesn't it? There's the seraphim comes to him with this coal on, and places it on his lips, and his lips are like his thing, right? He's Isaiah, he's the man of words. And that's the place that God meets him and brings particular forgiveness and new life. So we've got to remember, it's a misconception to think that church leaders somehow don't have sin in our lives. That I just heard today a really harrowing reminder of a church leader having an affair with someone. It's not a question of whether we have sin, it's what we do with it, whether we hide it and kind of spiral into further more destructive behavior, or whether we bring it into the light and we demonstrate something and model something to our brothers and sisters, to our churches, of how we deal with sin, that we bring it into the light, that we have people holding us to account. Yeah, I just wanted to read something from this book, Deeper, Dane Ortland. He just talks about that dynamic of, in our own kind of walk with the Lord, the importance of reminding ourselves of our weakness. He says, as you despair of yourself, agonizing over the desolation wrought by your failures, your weaknesses, and your inadequacies, feeling good so far? Let that despair take you way down deep into honesty with yourself, for there you will find a friend, the living Lord Jesus himself, who will startle and surprise you with his gentle goodness as you leave self behind in repentance and bank on him afresh in faith. So actually, like, that kind of consciousness of our sin and our inadequacy is the way, is the route to dependence and trust in Jesus, which is pretty key when we're planting a church, and just for ourselves, right? So prayer, sorry for our sin. Third, remembering that it's God's will, not ours, God's plans, not ours. People whose hearts are fully submitted to the Lord, they're going to be willing to obey God even when it doesn't make sense, or when it hurts. And that's going to happen, I'm afraid. And I'm sure you guys probably have some stories of how that's happened already. I guess Jesus in Gethsemane is the example, right? The blueprint for what it costs us to be faithful to God. That sense of a brutal honesty with God, and we found ourselves there quite often recently. You know, oh Lord, you called us here, and this is really hard, but we trust you, and we know that you know better than we do. Not our will, but yours be done. Have your way again in us. That seems to just be a constant cycle we're going on. Luke 14:27, Jesus says, whoever does not carry their cross and follow me cannot be my disciple. That cost of discipleship, I guess. I listened to, I don't know if any of you listen to the Rebuilders podcast. Recommend that. Could maybe send out a link. Yeah, they just had a thing on the Iranian church that I listened to the other week, and they were talking about, you know, what can the church in the West learn from the Iranian church, which is by some estimations the fastest growing church in the world. And that was one of the key things, just a sense that following Jesus, being a Christian, will cost us, and it's a price that's worth paying. That knowledge, that resolve is strongly present across the Iranian church in a way that it perhaps isn't always here. Oh, nice one, Pete. There you go. The link's in the chat if you've not noticed. Yeah. And then finally, fourth, the way that people whose hearts are fully submitted to the Lord will experience God's peace, his presence, and his provision. So even through all that challenge and difficulty that is the journey of planting church, God promises his peace, his presence, and his provision. I love, you know, Psalm 46, God is my refuge and strength, and then it goes, you know, even though the mountains might fall into the heart of the sea, and this kind of, these images of like terrible kind of disaster and chaos and stress, and then ends with be still and know that I am God. And often that, you know, that makes a nice fridge magnet, right? That verse, doesn't it? But we perhaps forget that that's a verse in a sort of war context, right? That somehow the psalmist is saying it's possible to be still and know that he is God, to have a sense of peace, even though the mountains may fall into the heart of the sea, even though the oceans may rage, and even though there might be difficulty and stress. God can bring his peace. Even like, it's not that we require a peaceful situation for God to bring his peace, but God is Lord over the chaos and is capable of bringing his peace to us, to those who have submitted to him, even in those situations. His presence, similarly, I'm slightly conscious of time, so I won't dig into some of these verses that we had, but the Great Commission, when Jesus says, go into all the world, make disciples of every nation, and I will be with you to the very end of the age. He has promised, it's in his word, that as we go about this work, he will be with us. He's not going to leave us on our own. And then provision, often a real kind of stress in church planting, particularly in contexts where there's not loads of resource, you know, where maybe where's the money going to come from? Where's the team going to come from? How are we going to make this thing happen when by all kind of worldly measures, it doesn't seem like we've got the stuff to make it happen. Well, for one, I think that's a good place for us to be, right? It encourages us to depend on God. and to, like, if we can kind of line everything up and sort of reckon we can get it all sorted and done with our own kind of plans and our own strength and our own resource, then we've probably not got a big enough vision of what God wants to do. But also, God has promised that he will provide. 2 Corinthians 9 says, God loves a cheerful giver. God is able to bless you abundantly. So in all things, at all times, having all that you need, you will abound in every good work. Yeah, he's the one with the cattle on 1,000 hills, right? He's not short of a bob or two. So we can trust him. Yeah, so that, I guess that's our contention, that that the Lord is calling us to live just fully sold out, fully surrendered lives for him, to plant church out of that kind of personal conviction and walk with the Lord, that he gave everything for us, so we should give everything for him, and all the problems and hiccups and molehills along the way, he can help us navigate, because he's greater. I think I'm going to draw us to a close just with a little bit of time of worship and prayer. If as we do this you've got super burning questions, then fine, but we've got a lot of weeks of the course to come, so we don't need to get everything sort of I's dotted and T's crossed immediately. But I think it would help us to spend a bit of time with the Lord right now. I don't know about you, but with the Queen dying, I've noticed people praising her is reaching quite like extreme levels. And like, I mean, like I love the Queen, she's great, and there's some amazing kind of testimonies of her character and goodness, her leadership quality, all that, her faith coming through. But I'll explain why I think it's interesting. Here's just an example. So this was from an MP today. She said, no matter how different that life is from, no matter how different our life is from the one that the Queen had, her universal experience feels like ours, and she feels like she is with us all. Then she went on to say, there's a story for everybody about the Queen's grace. Everybody feels like they have a tiny bit of her with us. And obviously that, that I'm not doubting that that's true, but it's interesting that we naturally reach for this kind of transcendent truth, don't we, as people, and the Queen almost embodying like the closest thing that many people have to God, because almost people thinking that she would go on forever, and this person of like impeccable character and stuff that would always be there and always be a kind of constant point. I was speaking to my mom on the phone, and she said to me that since her parents were both now dead, it was almost like the Queen was the last sort of unchanging point in her life. Now, apologies to the Germans and Kenyans amongst us, who are probably thinking, what on earth is he going on about, the Queen? So I'll get to Jesus in a second. Apologies. Yeah, almost like the Queen. I think for many British people, there's quite a disconcerting feeling when she died this week, because it's like, whoa, everything's kind of shifting, everything's changing. What's normal anymore? What's going to stay the same now in this world that's always kind of shifting and changing? Even the Queen's gone now. What do we do? And it made me think of Isaiah 6 again. So Isaiah 6 verse 1 says, in the year that King Uzziah died, I saw the Lord high and exalted, seated on a throne, and the train of his robe filled the temple. now you might know Uzziah, the king referred to there, he was, unlike many of the kings mentioned in the Old Testament, was quite a good king. He was also a very long-serving king. So I think it was about 40 odd years. So in that one verse, Isaiah is saying, after a period of real stability and knowing exactly what was going to happen, and us all feeling kind of comfortable and like things are lined up and in order and we can get our head around it. After that, he then died, and it's like, whoa, what can we hold on to now? What can we trust in now? And so there's that parallel with the Queen dying, but of course the answer in Isaiah isn't just for us to kind of think, oh, wasn't Uzziah great and I wish he was still here or whatever. It's almost like God comes into the scene after this time of like flux and says, I'm the king who is always here. I'm the monarch who always reigns. I'm not going anywhere. Don't put your hope in anything else to save you. It's me. I'm the Lord. I'm the one you need. So I just felt like it was probably a good place for us to land, to remember that perhaps particularly amongst ministries and those in church leadership and this kind of work, church planting is a very shifting and changing kind of work where it's difficult to kind of, like, as soon as we put our kind of trust in something, it's like it slipped through our fingers. As soon as we're like, oh, well, this team member's reliable, then they've kind of gone again. As soon as we're like, okay, this kind of outreach thing is working, all of a sudden it's not working again, and we have to rethink our kind of plans and the way that we do things. So we just always must trust in Jesus, right? Because he doesn't change. He is who we need. So I just thought I'd stick a song on. You can shout and sing along from the comfort of your muted Zoom room, or you can just let the music wash over you and talk to the Lord in that way. But it's a song called Firm Foundation, and I'll have to remember how I share a screen. Go. Sorry, I almost showed you all my WhatsApp conversations, which would have been highly amusing. So Lord, we thank you for this evening. Thank you for these amazing people. We just pray now, Lord, that you would meet us as we worship you. See that all right?
Christ is my firm foundation, the rock on which I stand when everything around me is shaking. I've never been more glad that I put my faith in Jesus, 'cause he's never let me down. He's faithful through generations. I've still got joy in chaos. I've got peace that makes no sense. I won't be under. I'm not held by my own strength. 'Cause I built my life on Jesus. He's never let me down. He's faithful through every season. So why would he fail? Shout it out. He won't. He won't. He won't fail. He won't fail. He won't. He won't. No, he won't fail. He won't fail. He won't fail. Christ is my firm foundation. Let's go. Testify. The rock on which I stand. When everything around me is shaking. I've never been more. I've never been so glad that I put my faith in Jesus. Yeah. He's never let me down. He's faithful through generations. So why would he? I need you to shout it out. Sing it out. Say, he won't. No, he won't. No, he won't. He won't fail. He won't fail. He won't. He won't. Yeah. He won't. I've never seen him fail. No. He won't fail. He won't fail. I have a testimony. I have a story to sing. This is my story. This is my song. I have a testimony. Can I sing my testimony? Rain came, wind blew, my house was built on it. I'm safe with you. I'm gonna make. I feel somebody's faith rising. Rain came, wind blew, my house was built on it. This is the reason you made it. seen the righteous forsaken, and he won't start now. Never seen the righteous forsaken, and he won't start now. Rain came, wind blew, my house was built from. This is how I made it. I'm safe with you. I'm gonna make it. Oh, yeah. You tried to knock me out. You tried to shake me up. But my house was built on you. Oh, I'm safe with you. I'm gonna make it. So I'm gonna make it. I'm gonna make it. I'm standing strong on you. I'm standing strong. I'm gonna make it through. I'm gonna make it. My house is built on. My house is built on. So you're gonna make it. I'm gonna make it. 'Cause I'm standing strong. I'm standing strong. I'm gonna make it. I'm gonna make it through. 'Cause my house is built on. Y'all give it up for the
Amen. Amen. Just a verse from you from the end of Jude. Now to him who is able to keep you from stumbling and to present you before his glorious presence without fault and with great joy, to the only God our Saviour be glory, majesty, power and authority through Jesus Christ our Lord, before all ages, now and forevermore. Amen. Amen. Hey, thanks so much for being with us this evening, guys. It's been a real pleasure. Our next session is October 3rd. Yeah, if you've got any questions in the meantime, you want to spread the word to anyone else who might be interested. I didn't ask your permission, sorry, but sneakily started recording this so we could fire it the way of people who might have missed the first session for them to catch up. Yeah, Pete's put a bit of info there in the chat about what's coming up. I won't just read it out because that would be a waste. But yeah, really lovely to meet you all and look forward to seeing you some more.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, guys. Lovely to meet you all.
Bye, guys.
You too.
See you
Bye.
soon.
Thank you very much.
God bless.
Good
Bye
night.
now.
Thanks.
Bye.
I'm still reading. Long post. Anyways. Goodbye.
See you later.